Hello, welcome to the Graduation Equity Webinar Series. I'm Kepi Anderson. I'm a Assistant Director for Early Warning Systems. And today we are talking about systems and interventions for attendance and re-engagement. This meeting is being recorded and should be available in the next couple of days on YouTube. We have closed captions available in the menu if you want to use those. And our PowerPoint will be posted in the chat, but it's also available on our webpage if you want to follow along. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. People love to see their friends. You can put your name, your role, and your district. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of Student Engagement and Supports at OSPI. And at OSPI, we believe each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. The Graduation Equity Webinar Series was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately to graduation. Through our webinars, we're striving to think critically about historical contexts and the opportunities that we have to get curious about and dismantle policies and practices that don't serve our youth. We want to make it possible for each student to have access to the instruction and support that will make them successful in school and in life. Spring has come to Washington, and with the beautiful cherry blossoms and the tulips blooming, I know when I look outside, I often think about what a beautiful place we live in, especially when the sun's shining or all those rainbows start to show up. If you'd like to share the traditional lands on which you are located today in the chat, we'd love to honor that. And in my life, I mostly travel the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island, the Coast Salish, the Cowlitz, and the Nisqually tribes. I'd like to acknowledge the Indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still live here today. We are so glad that you are here with us. Also want to make sure people know that they can connect with our Office of Native Education. So if you're interested in learning about tribal consultation and how to grow those relationships in your area, we want to help. Today we're talking about attendance, and attendance is a sign that students feel comfortable at school. And who feels comfortable at school is definitely an equity issue. Schools have the power to signal to students that they belong at school through visuals that are inclusive, building connections, and strong relationships that set the foundation for why a kid would want to come to school. We know that students come to school on days when they have mentoring or a favorite class or for cherished school events. When you look at the students who aren't attending, regularly consider the ways that you're conveying to them that they're invited and welcome back in, and the opportunities to cultivate connections to peers and adults. In today's webinar, we're hoping to cover foundational system strategies for attendance and re-engagement work, and you'll learn about data champions, empathy data, and opportunities to progress monitor. You'll also hear lessons learned from SELA and Federal Way school districts about how they're using attendance teams, humor, incentives, and a strong sense of belonging to encourage regular attendance for staff and students. And of course, we'll have some resources that'll help you get started too. I brought with me Christy Johnson. She is our OSPI Assistant Director of Attendance and Engagement. Chrissy is an amazing resource for attendance, and her team is there to help. So if you continue to have questions, Chrissy is awesome. And we've also got with us Shelby Lockhart, and you'll hear more about her in a little bit, but she's the Executive Director of Lockhart Collaborative. We would like to know a little bit more about our audience, and so we are going to look at a poll here for a second. If I can find the polling feature on this thing. Okay, there we go. So who is here? Tell us a little bit about your role, what grades you're working with, and how familiar you are with our topic of attendance. While you do that, I'm gonna look at that chat really quick. And we're going to be sharing the slides with you in the chat. So if you'd like to check those out, our links are also going to be on our resource sheet. And we've got about 65% participating in the poll. And if you can't actually access it, you might have to scroll down because sometimes it won't let you say I'm done until you answer all the questions. So it looks like today we have a lot of folks who are in the school counselor or district office roles. We have a lot of middle, high school, and people who cover other areas. And people are pretty familiar with this topic. So I feel like we can talk about nuts and bolts. So thanks everybody for participating in the poll. Check out the results there if you want to see as well. And we're going to go to Chrissy. Chrissy, can you tell us a little bit about OSPI's attendance guiding principles? Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kefi, and thank you everyone for being here today. I am so pleased to be able to have a conversation with you all about attendance and engagement. I'm so excited to hear from Shelby and our colleagues from Federal Way and CELA. I do want to start our conversation out with the OSPI attendance guiding principles. And these, I feel, really keep us centered on the why, our why around focusing on attendance and how we focus on attendance. Attendance and engagement are foundational to student learning. If students aren't in attendance, then they can't learn the wonderful things that we are able to teach them. Absences tell us when a student has not accessed instruction, and therefore all absences matter, including excused absences. Absences are a critical early warning indicator that can tell us a couple of things. One, they can reflect inequities that might be caused or perpetuated by our systems, or when a student and family might need more support. We really have an opportunity to get curious about why students aren't attending and to build systems around that curiosity, which we will talk about today. And students and families are our best partners to understand the barriers to attendance. The purpose of attendance and truancy interventions, and I really want to highlight this one, are to reduce barriers to attendance and support students to engage. Those laws and interventions are not intended to punish. Lastly, schools and districts have lots of opportunity for prevention and intervention before involving the court. We know that chronic absenteeism is a big issue right now. You all have been experiencing it over the last couple of years as we return from the pandemic. It is a national priority, and I wanted to share this quote with you from the U.S. Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona. We know that one of the most important things we can do to help our students learn is to make sure they come to school consistently and make our families and communities strong partners in this effort. Every goal we hold for our students, increasing academic achievement, delivering a well-rounded education, and creating pathways to college and a career, requires that they be regularly in school and are engaged in their learning and connecting with others. I want to share a little bit of data with you from our Washington report card, where we display attendance data through the metric regular attendance. So in the school year 2022-23, the last full school year, 70% of our students attended 90% or more of their school days. So 70% were regular attenders, which means 30% of our students were chronically absent, missing 10% or more of their school days. Before we get too far, I do want to clarify a couple of definitions. When we talk about chronic absenteeism, we are talking about students that are missing 10% or more of their school days, and that includes both excused and unexcused. This can look like 2 days a month or over a full school year, 18 days. Truancy, we have specific laws in Washington state that require actions from school districts when students have unexcused absences. And those are absences that have not been excused by the school or called in by the parent. The research is clear on chronic absence. Students that are chronically absent in the early years are much less likely to read at grade level by the 3rd grade. Students who cannot read at grade level by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times more likely than their proficient 3rd grade peers to not graduate. And lastly, in the high school years, if a student is chronically absent for any 2 years between 8th and 12th grade, they have a 50% chance of not finishing high school. Lastly, I will leave you with this. Here's what we know about addressing attendance and engagement. We can do it most effectively when we embed it in our multi-tiered systems of support, just like how we approach academics, behavior, mental health. And we do that through these 5 components: team-driven shared leadership, data-based decision-making, family, student, and community engagement, a continuum of supports that has a robust tier 1, which Shelby will talk to you about today, as well as our panelists, that include evidence-based practices. And with that, I am so pleased to hand it over to Shelby Lockhart. Shelby is a seasoned educational professional. She has years of experience as a principal, and most recently, she has worked for ESD 105 as their attendance and re-engagement lead. Over the last year, I have learned immense amounts from Shelby, and I am really happy to hand it over to her today so that you can also learn from her experience around improving attendance. Shelby.
Great. Yes, thanks, Chrissy. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I'm really grateful to be invited to speak about robust Tier 1 systems and practices in our public schools. I really appreciate that this conversation is happening. It's a really important topic right now, and I know we've been talking about it for a while, but I do spend a lot of time out in the field around the state and know that helping students engage in our schools is a challenge right now, especially at our secondary levels. And I know enrollment issues are a very hard reality for some of our districts right now. So I'm really grateful we continue this conversation, and attendance is very, very important in our state. With that, I want to talk a little bit about our current reality and what a lot of us are seeing out in the field, in our public schools, and experiencing around this topic. We have a really immense need for a focus on Tier 1 right now. I know we talk about this a lot in the academic realms where we need to really shore up our core in reading or math. It is a reality in attendance as well. What we notice and what we hear from the field is that a lot of us built up this really strong muscle memory around responding to students' needs during COVID, excuse me, and we would skip right to Tier 2 and Tier 3 support systems for students and families. And we started to miss the opportunities to build a really robust Tier 1. And it was very natural with COVID. So I'm just shining a light on that as a collective public school behavior right now that we really need to keep holding ourselves accountable to, is that Tier 1 focus. we really, really want to help individual students as public educators. We have these big, huge hearts for our kids and our families, and we really need to remind ourselves that every student deserves a strong core and a strong tier 1, in addition to other supports as needed. But that's really the essence of this time today. We really also see a reality around a need for better data and data champions, stewards of that data, people who can get visual data to the table for these teams that oftentimes don't have a lot of time to meet and make decisions. And so we've done a real focus on this idea and practice of having data champions in each building, each school, each district, so that we have really good visual data for our staff, our families, our teams, especially our tier 1 teams. And then finally, one of the big needs right now is this collective responsibility or culture of collective responsibility at the tier 1 level. Again, we have this real collective effort around tier 2, grouping kids, one-on-one case management, talking about individual student needs, but we have sometimes skipped over the culture of a collective tier 1 responsibility. So that's what we'll talk about today. The only other thing I would say about the culture of collective responsibility at tier 1 is that we do have a really good muscle memory there. If that's not in place in your school or your district, we have experience with PBIS. We have experience with PLCs a lot of times. It is very similar, just putting that core in place with your staff and your families. So what do we mean when we talk about tier 1? This is a common question that comes up in trainings and in working and coaching teams right now. Here is what we mean. Tier 1 teaming, they meet often. They are a systems check and an improvement team. They really look at the whole school system, the district system. It is often a rule that I establish with tier 1 teams when I'm coaching a team to not mention individual student names in those meetings, because we're really trying to build those muscles around looking at our systems and our practices as a whole. So tier 1 means that we have a tier 1 team. We have a team that just looks at systems and practices of a school. We also have tier 1 data or universal data. Again, not individual student names, but rather, where do we see hotspots in our building? Where do we see dips in our monthly attendance? When is this happening? Is it first period, second period, sixth period? And asking those types of systems questions with that universal data. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, tier 1 means progress monitoring, what we said we would do and the outcomes that we want to get around our tier 1. So if we say we really want to improve attendance on Monday mornings because we see this universal dip in our middle school, then we stop and ask ourselves, are we really having an impact there? And are we doing what we said we would do to improve attendance on Monday mornings? This is probably one of our bigger areas of need when it comes to tier 1 teaming, is to really hold ourselves in a cycle of inquiry that helps us stop and ask those questions. Are we getting the outcomes we want? And are we doing what we said we would do? The other part of the meaning behind tier 1 when we talk about attendance is also having a universal culture of attendance. We want to be hearing about it throughout the building, the school, the community. There's value in being present at school. The students see why they benefit when they're there. It's just a very important topic in the district, the school, you can hear it and kind of feel it everywhere. The other strategy is really around being clear with everyone. Do we have really clear processes and practices? Are those visualized? Are they in our student handbooks? Are they in our new staff orientation? You know, can a new staff and a new student come into our school and receive what everybody else receives? And do they know kind of how we roll here? Is it really clear how we do how we have this culture of attendance. Do we have these common behaviors that are clearly articulated? So that's what we mean when we talk about tier 1 in the attendance world. A question that comes up often is who is on a tier 1 attendance team who is talking about attendance. And so a lot of times when I'm out coaching teams, I notice that there's a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 teaming and supporting of students, but we're missing the tier 1 time or tier 1 team. And so tier 1 is just like PLCs, PBIS, things like that. It's all your staff, it's all your students, it's your whole community. It is a all hands on deck approach. So it means that there is this tier 1 team that can make connections with your whole staff, can motivate all your students, can really get in connection with your community. Again, they're not a tier 1 team that wants to talk about individual students. I mean, they may want to, but that's not the point. The people that are on a tier 1 team, sometimes I jokingly say they are your sparkles and your tutus people. They're like those PBIS people. And oftentimes people merge their PBIS and attendance tier 1 because they're the motivators, they're the positive. They really want to get everybody behind this big universal effort. Tier 2 teams are more about grouping and removing needs or removing barriers in groups. Tier 3 is really around that one-on-one work, that case management. So tier 1, keep it universal in attendance. So who do we see in the room in a tier 1 team? We definitely want somebody who can make decisions. You are going to be in these cycles of inquiry where you need to adjust, make decisions at a universal level. So you want to see an assistant principal, a principal, somebody who has the authority to make decisions on the spot. You want systems thinker. And again, you just want people who can motivate your staff and get them all bought in. Some big ideas that we try to focus on when we're working on building a very strong core in schools and in districts. Some of those big ideas are really around, like I said, this all hands on deck approach. Everybody's got to know their current reality in their school. They need to know what is needed and that everybody needs to be involved. A tier 1 team meets regularly. So let me back up just a minute. We have this culture of responsibility, all hands on deck. The other big idea is that we have this teaming routine. We don't just say we have a tier 1 team, we actually have it on the calendar. It's prioritized. There's cycles of inquiry. That teaming routine is clearly defined and committed to and protected. And then finally, the other big idea is that data champion idea. And, just an example of placing high importance on that and protecting that role in your district or your school. We work a lot of times with data champion networks because oftentimes, I don't know if you all have experienced this, but getting access to data, visualizing data, comprehending the data, making sure it's clean and reliable, that is hard work sometimes in our system. Some of our student information systems are not easy to work with for some folks. So having a network of data champions in your region, your district, things like that is a very powerful, big idea, big move that folks can start making. So those are just some of those big ideas, big concepts. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and I just want you in the chat to tell us what tier 1 attendance systems and supports are you currently implementing in your district, your school, your region. I'll just pause for a minute. We just want to hear what attendance systems, supports, practices, those universal things that you're doing. I see someone putting incentives in there and awards, check in, check out, awards, study of the data and clear attendance expectations, an awards dance. I love it. Contests, lots of incentives. A culture of belonging and responsive relationships in the classroom. Right. And so when we talk about tier 1, what I would hope in the chat is that any of these that pop into the chat, we can always put the word universal before it. Remember, tier 1 is about every student, every family, every staff member deserves this universal support around attendance. It's not just for one kid or a small group that have these barriers. It is a universal thing that everybody gets access to. Thank you for sharing some of those great ideas. I hope everybody will take a minute and just kind of look at what other people in our state are doing when it comes to tier 1 attendance systems and practices. Okay, I'm going to go into another area here where we're going to get a little bit more into the structures and supports for students and staff, and give a couple examples of some powerful work happening out in the state. I'm really excited for Federal Way and CELA to share their work as well, because they've got the best stories. They're living it right now. So one of the things that we talk about is really understanding your tier 1 system and your practice problems, understanding why students are not coming. Sometimes when we see these dips in our attendance, or we're really struggling to get past a plateau, or we just see that we're not really getting kids engaged as much as we want, sometimes we start to look at the students and the families and go, oh gosh, what is wrong? What is, what might be wrong with them? And what we really need to do in a tier 1 supportive structure is to turn the light on ourselves in public schools and say, well, what might be wrong with our systems and practices? Why aren't students and families responding to what we are offering as a universal support? Or do we even have those universal supports in place? Do we have pockets of goodness in our system where some staff greet kids at the door and some don't? Some really create this culture of belonging, some don't. Or do we have a universal system? So one of the biggest things you can do as a staff is to really understand your problem. And I will say it again, the problem is not the students. The problem is not the families. The problem oftentimes is we've got a system or practices that aren't working for our kids and families. So we've got to get really clear about what is happening there. And so one of the things that we've done in some areas is to really start getting out into the field and asking those students and families who aren't engaging, why don't you come? What is it that gets in the way when you're absent? And get really clear and really listen to what they have to say. We really focus in on qualitative data a bit more than the quantitative data. And we really try and understand the problem. Here is some quantitative data. There's some numbers, right? And really, I wanted to share this because everyone has access to our regular attendance data on the OSPI report card. It tells us kind of what has been the trend over time. We can see us compared to other schools. We can see us compared to the state. And it's a really good starting point for a team. I often get a call and a team will say, where do we start? And I say, well, start with knowing your current reality. Like, what is your regular attendance rate, or the inverse, which is chronic absenteeism, right? So in Washington State, we could say, well, we're at a 69.7% regular attendance rate. And is that what we want? And so we start there. And all that we need to do at this point is to really ask, what do you notice and what do you wonder? And let's get really curious and start asking some questions. So this should really just break the seal on that, right? Really, it's about getting curious and asking, why aren't students coming? The next thing that we do, like I said, is we get out into the field and start asking questions. This is an example of some work that we did in Grandview School District, where we went out and it was less about why aren't students coming. This was centered on the experience of the staff and the leaders involved in improving attendance. We wanted to know what was their experience trying to understand their data, access it, use it to make attendance improvements. But I share this because this is the work. This is the real work in the field, is to get empathetic, get out into the field and ask, how is it going for you? What happens when you try and do good work? And so we ask questions like, tell me what it's like to access attendance data in your district. Tell me what it's like to look at attendance data as a team. And then we got all this information about what was working, what's not. And we worked with the teams to really identify, well, we've identified some problems. Of those problems, where do we start? Which of these could be a really high impact and low input response? Some people call it low hanging fruit. Some people call it quick wins, but that's some of the work you can do once you ask the questions. So this is just an example. You could do this with students in your school, right? When my favorite question, I sat in some ninth grade hallways day after day, and I would just talk with ninth graders and say, hey, when you don't come to school, what gets in the way? And I heard amazing things. I mean, I heard some hard things, and I heard some really amazing honesty, and I was currently working with a team that had made some assumptions that the ninth graders were just being kind of goofballs and messing around and skipping school. Well, the data that I collected told a completely different story about what ninth graders were experiencing and what was getting in their way. So this is the real good evidence-based work that you can do when you're trying to improve attendance at your school, your district. The next thing that I'll share around these supportive structures is just really around those tier 1 teaming routines. So like I said, you want to get these inquiry cycles, these teaming patterns in place. A lot of people say what gets calendared gets done. It is a really powerful move for leaders to get the calendar out and say, we're going to commit to having a tier 1 attendance team, and we're going to get it on the calendar. And when we meet, we're going to have really clear roles and responsibilities, just like we do with PLCs and PBIS teams, things like that. And we're going to have data that's ready before the meeting. We're going to really build the capacity of this data champion that we have. And that data champion can be anybody in your building, whoever really wants to take on that role, build their capacity, get them networked, connect them with other people that speak data champion language. But you get them into a routine as well, where they can pull really good visual data for your tier 1 team. They also hold you accountable to look at your universal data. They hold you accountable when you start talking about individual kids or that group of kids. They really stay strong with you and say, no, we're going to look at our whole system and see where kids are not benefiting or where they're disengaging. And then we're going to tackle that as a whole staff. The other thing that happens in these teaming routines is what I said before. The data champion, your facilitator, they really stop you and say, what is working? Does the staff know what is working? What adjustments do we need to make? If you've done the work of improvement, this is the PDSA cycle. This is where you get into that cycle of inquiry and keep making things better and better and better and improving. I'm going to talk just a little bit more about the data champion role. They are really just your magical person on that team. They are so important. A facilitator is really important, but that data champion is your unicorn. You want to take really good care of them. You want to make sure they have the capacity to get that really good visual data to your team and your staff. They need that weekly routine supported and clear, and they need partners in that work. They need to know that their work is the right work. They have clear and reliable data. So here's an example of a data champion process. They're really looking for less than 2 absences a month. They're looking for those hot spots in your visual data. A lot of times folks use Skyward. They go to their attendance graphs and pull that visual data. They might find things like your Monday morning problem, your 6th period problem. This many students each month or each week are having more than 2 absences a month. So they get that data really visual and accessible for everyone, and they make it public. That's one of their really powerful moves, is to make that public. They keep the staff in the loop on the visual data, and they keep that team in the loop on that visual data. The other thing that I'll share is oftentimes when the data champion and the tier 1 team brings the problem or the challenge to the staff to say, hey, everybody, check out the data. What do you notice, wonder? Oh, we have a Monday morning problem. Okay, so the staff oftentimes is going to need that menu of options at that point to ask the staff to come up with all the solutions on the spot. Typically, you don't have a lot of time with the staff, and they need the evidence-based practices that will address that barrier. Ideally, your tier 1 team has done empathy interviews and looked at your Monday mornings and started to ask the kids and families on Monday mornings when they don't come, what gets in the way. So when you put the menu in front of your staff, those options to address the problem actually link to the problem that you've asked the students and the families about. So this is a big move here for your tier 1 work, is to get a menu of evidence-based responses in place for your staff so they feel empowered. They also feel some autonomy. They feel like they're part of the decision-making. This incentive effort or this tier 1 blitz that they're doing is not happening to them, it's happening with them. You want to get their input, you want to give them ideas. So keep this in mind if you bring this data forward to your staff. And finally, I'm going to end with just some quick wins to get you started. Like I said, I get a lot of phone calls and people say, we want to do better. Where do we start? And I would just say, really get that tier 1 data at your fingertips, ask for support, call your ESD, call your attendance specialist, call the people in your district that know how to access that visual data. Reach out to Chrissy and I. We can help you get that data visualized and get into that routine of getting visual data. It's just like PBIS. It's just like PLCs. You got to come to those meetings ready to go. The other thing I'll say is it's really important that you keep that mindset around, this is a systems challenge and a practice challenge. This is not a student problem or a student challenge. It really is about changing the way we offer support to students in our schools and the way that we're responsive to who they are in their reality. So keeping that team centered on that mindset is really, really important. It's the starting point. It's the idea that you bring to the table, the norm every time you meet. And it really is extremely important to keep at the table with your team and your staff. The other thing I'll say to get you started is when you get access to your data and get really clear about what your current reality is, set a really clear aim or goal around the improvement you want to make. And what I find is really, really important right now, and some of the goals that I see where they could be better, is that we need shorter term goals around attendance. A lot of times we make these big, long, year-long goals, and they're not bad. It's good to have a long-term goal, but we often miss the short-term goals. And we've seen the best work in attendance in our state when teams get together and say, this month we want to go from here to here in terms of regular attendance, or less than 2 absences for our student body. And we don't want to compare our numbers to the end of the year or last year's regular attendance. We want to improve attendance in April, and we're going to go look at last year's April, the year before's April, the year before's April. So it's really important that you get clear about the goal you're setting and set your team up for success, set your staff up for success by having those short, measurable goals. Last bit, and then we'll take some questions. Don't forget to ask people closest to the problem what it is that they need to get to school. Why aren't they coming? Make sure you're really, really clear about the problem. We get on Attendance Works and have all kinds of ideas. and we want to put these really cool incentive programs in place. We want to go buy all these trinkets for kids. I think we see this in PBIS a lot of times too, in that land. Or in our PBIS attendance merge, we just want to start doing these fun, cool things. But it's really, really, really important to have good information and understand what's happening in your system before you start coming up with solutions or putting incentives or making those, putting those actions in place. Make sure you're clear why you're doing what you're doing. Start small. You know, don't feel like you have to improve your whole school's attendance in 1 month. Maybe do some tests. See how it works at 3rd grade first. See how your staff adjusts to it. But all I can say is start small first and then scale out. It's all about improvement science. If you've been in the world of improvement, you got to start small with prototypes and change ideas that feel manageable. You don't want to burn your staff out right out the chute. So those are some of the things I just wanted to share with everybody. I hope that gave you some ideas of where to start or where to keep going in your efforts. I know everybody's doing great work out there. But always, you could call me, email me. If you have questions, I'm here. This is what I love to talk about and do. So I just want to thank you for your time and open it up for questions about this work. Thank you.
And
Thank you so
everybody,
much.
let's
Oh,
give Shelby a round of applause before we go into Q&A. Thank you, Shelby.
thank you so much, Shelby. Getting lots of applause there. I had a clarification question for you, and then there is another question in the chat about the culture of looking at attendance. Can you share, and I know that you mentioned them throughout the talk a little bit more about when you say tier 1 data, what are some like examples of tier 1 data and what's not tier 1
Yeah.
data?
Great question. Tier 1 data is really your universal system data. So an example of that would be you're pulling up your attendance graphs in Skyward and you look at the graph that has days of the week when your kids are coming and not, when your students are coming or not, or periods. What period are students coming the most? When are they coming the least? That is a real big global systems view, and that's really tier 1. If you've been in a PBIS meeting, if you've been in a PLC meeting, you start by really zooming out and going, who's responding, who's not collectively. In our whole system, where do we see dips, weaknesses, areas where we could have a systemic response? What is not tier 1 data is let's pull up a list of individual student names and go, okay, who has thresholded to red, who's still in the green, who's still in the yellow. That is a tier 2, tier 3 conversation. It is very, very important that you do that. But if you are trying to establish a tier 1 team and do universal work where the whole staff, it's all hands on deck, you go after your hot spots. It's like being in a Swiss data meeting for PBIS and go, big 5, who, what, when, where, why, right? Like, where do we see these big dips happening? And is it the 7th grade hall where we just see all these kids go through there and things kind of fall apart? There's a universal event happening or a universal system that's not working for our kids. Let's go work on it. The whole staff's all in. Let's really work on that and make it better for the students. So we call it hotspots sometimes. It's the days of the week. It's the periods when kids don't come. It's the early release days when families are like, why go? It's only half day. That is a universal problem in many of our public schools. Does that help?
Absolutely, thank you.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Jocelyn, do you want to share some of the questions from the Q&A?
Yes, we have someone who asked, how does a system nurture a need for a collective responsibility when it can be hard sometimes for people within systems not to personalize the data? In other words, how can we shift from we have too many chronic absences in this building to what supports can we add, adjust, or abandon to improve the systems we have in place?
Yeah, I love this question. So to get a collective culture of responsibility around this, it really depends on your context. So your current culture, if you already have a culture of data literacy and inquiry, you're going to want to lean on that. If folks are really used to looking at their data and looking at where they're getting gains and where they're not and how to scale the gains and really go after the hot spots, you're in good shape. Just transfer that academic muscle to an attendance muscle. If a culture of inquiry, a collective culture of responsibility around attendance work is just not in place at all, you really have to start with two things. Focus on the positive, where are you getting gains, and start scaling, and just really get the staff used to looking at data and saying, oh my gosh, Fridays, we are knocking it out of the park. Let's see if we can even do better next week. And really just starting that muscle memory with them, and then start tackling some problems with them. Oh, but Mondays, what could we do to make Mondays a little bit better? Because we do really well on Fridays. What is it that we're doing on Fridays that we could transition to Mondays? So really starting with that asset base, the positive base, if you're starting from the beginning. The other thing I think that is really powerful is to just get visual data in front of people and ask them what they see and might wonder or want to do about it. I think sometimes in attendance land and even academic world, we often are telling our staff we have a reading problem, we have an attendance problem, and I think our staff and our students and our families deserve to kind of see the information and have a chance to just be curious and not have answers quite yet, or not know the exact response, but have time together to be curious and wonder and hold space for a couple weeks and say, we don't know either. What if we all went and asked 10 kids and then we come back to the next staff meeting and we tell each other what we found out? Let people engage in the process of inquiry to build that collective effort and that buy-in. If we tell people what their data says, or if we tell people what we think they need to do about it, you're not building a collective culture. You're just telling people what to do. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Shelby.
Mhm.
We have another question. Is there any work being done to find a balance between promoting attendance and being more flexible for students and families who, especially post-COVID, feel it's important and better for all students to avoid going to school when sick,
Yeah.
to avoid the impact on other students and staff?
Yeah, I think there's room for both. I think we all need to be flexible. It's 2024, and we need to get clear about where is flexibility needed and how do we do that as a system. How do we articulate our processes? If we recognize that we're a high school and our students are not coming to school because outside of school, they're seeing that they benefit from doing other things than showing up at high school, then we as a high school have to figure out, how do we respond to that? How do we get flexible? How do we ask the students what they need and what they find value in? Um, I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. I think we have to get flexible and we have to get clear about the expectations at the same time. Our expectations are that we have a chance to hear you and find out what you need. Our expectations are, we're a public school and here's some kind of baseline things that we have to have in place. But again, we want to hear you. We notice you're not coming on Fridays. Why not? Oh, you're finding internships, you're finding other ways to engage and grow and do other things. Well, okay, can we get flexible in our system? Sometimes it's not, that positive, like they're going to find other internships. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's crisis and trauma and a drift into unsafe environments. And so you've got to get flexible and responsive in a different way. But I think it's really about asking why students aren't coming and then getting flexible once you have that data and going, is there room for us to be flexible here and come up with some creative solutions with the students and families? I hope that helps.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Shelby.
Shelby.
Mhm.
Jocelyn, if I could jump in, I see a theme in some of the other Q&A questions. Shelby, I think you can address this. I also think the panelists can address this.
Okay.
A concern that parents are perhaps being too permissive
Mhm.
and I wonder if we can come back to the concept of a culture of attendance and really think about, what specifics do we do to really kind of build the expectation and culture around attendance?
Yeah. So the one thing I think about, I think about two things in that scenario. Of course, I would want to ask those parents who we assume or perceive as being permissive. I would want to go ask them questions because I'm making some assumptions about how they're functioning as a family and the choices they're making. I need to go find out why is it that they're making those choices, and then look at my system and my practice and going and ask, am I being responsive enough to these families? Because oftentimes when we do empathy work, we make assumptions, and then when we really go ask, the themes that come back and the responses are very different than what we assumed. So I really can't say that enough. Go out and ask the people who are not coming to your school why they're not coming. The other part is the culture part, right? And so trying to build a culture around attendance means that everybody feels like they are a part of developing the culture. If the culture is really defined by the school staff and a subgroup of students, we know that many families and many students look at that and go, well, that's not my culture. That's the school's culture. Nobody asked me how I wanted to be a part or define our culture. So the culture of attendance, like any part of school culture or community culture, you've got to include everybody in it to be a part of it if you want it to be a collective culture. It's kind of like, bringing two teams together that have different cultures and they've been doing different work. If you're going to establish a culture with them, you have to kind of declare, hey, we're collectively going to have this new thing together. This is our new thing and it's our culture. Let's do it together. Not, okay, this team's culture is going to dominate this culture and now this is your culture. So you got to get staff and students and families involved in defining that culture. It's not something just a staff can define or build. I hope that helps. Everybody got real quiet.
Shelby, thank you so much. I just wanted to highlight one thing that was in the chat from Mary Snyder, where she said, thank you for that reframe, Shelby. A culture of attendance can also include a culture of curiosity, shifting
Yes.
away from assumptions and judgment. So
Yes.
I think with that, I really want to make sure that we have time for the panelists and the practitioners. Shelby, appreciate you so much. And I know that there are many more questions that people have, and we hope to address some of them during the panel. And certainly after our time today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Shelby. With that, I would like to shift over to our wonderful panel. And I'm so pleased that today we have Sine Wright-Wilkins, who is the Executive Director of Equity from Federal Way Public Schools, and her colleague, Diana Kasube, who is the coordinator in the Office of Equity, also at Federal Way. And we have Joel Starr, who is the assistant principal from Selah High School, here to share about their work in attendance. And so with that, I would love to kick it off by asking Joel to share a little bit about himself and the work that your that your school has done on attendance. Tell us a little bit about your story.
All right, well, welcome. Joel Starr from Selah High School in the Yakima Valley, go Vikes. and really living the reality you guys are living right now in the attendance world. Boots on the ground, assistant principal, attendance person. We are a one high school district with about 1,100 students. And so that kind of gives you a context. I've worked in other districts where there's 4 other high schools. And so we're the one show here in SELA. We really, wanted to tackle attendance coming back from COVID, the reality of the slump that happened with curiosity where we can begin. And so where we actually started was and building that trust with families as well. And where we started was with Shelby. Actually, I reached out to Shelby before the school year, and she kind of gave me some of the information you guys got, and gave foundation, gave playbooks and other stuff like that. And then I brought that back to a team that I had started to build. And really just taking a look at the reality. We had 300 plus truant students, and we don't have the manpower to deal with 300 plus students, person power. And so how do we tackle that? And understanding that's our reality, and what are the rules? I saw some of the questions of what are the rules of attendance and truancy. So what are the rules? What's our reality? And then how do we tackle that in a way that has that curiosity, realizing we're in a new reality with, we have Google Classrooms where kids can get work. And so they're like, well, I just get the work done at home. Well, how do we build a culture where they need to be here and to get those important parts? So we started with our weekly meetings, really identified all of our tiers and who had what roles and what tiers. So that we understood that, hey, when we're working on this tier, we understand that another group is going to be tackling that as well. And so really communicating that out to our staff and all of our people that we work with. Data was huge. We actually hired a data person to collect the data. We also got attendance response through our data management system, which was helping pull data weekly and creating reports so that when we had meetings, we weren't the ones, because I used to be the person that found all the data, and then I was working on this, and it just, I wasn't as effective as I could until we got that person. And so really appreciate my principal helping support and understanding we need that data person, not only for attendance, but academics and other ways like that. And then we started with empathy interviews with our students. We did a looking at where are they at coming back from COVID, how we can continue to support them and realize the reality of the impact of the pandemic and how things have changed in the world. Dealing with high schoolers, there's lots of ways. I mean, Shelby kind of mentioned it, that kids are getting side jobs and making money in other ways. And how do we continue to understand that the importance of, the rules around being in school, but at creating that why for them here at that building. And then we really looked at taking tier 1 and tier 3, because we were getting really good at tier 3. And how do we kind of squish that together? So the collective whole is working together to build our collective vision and how we're going to tackle this, and then also know that we trying to squish that together so we can try to lessen that. So really attacking those tier 3 really early, those ones that come up really quickly, but trying to work upriver to get that tier 1. And then really rebuilding that, making the visibility of the work that we're doing. And I'll talk about some other parts of the work and some victories that we had, but we actually, and Shelby just put in it, we had a 10% increase from the previous year to this year, and just really excited to see the work that we're doing to maintain that and continue to build that work. And it's catching on. So there's some cool things going on, but I'll let the other panelists share their part.
Thanks so much, Joel. Sine and Diana, can you tell us a little bit about your district and your work on attendance?
For sure. So we're Federal Way Public Schools. It is a larger district here in the state with 22,000 scholars, which is down from the 23, 24 that we had pre-COVID. So we've seen a decrease, as the majority of districts across the state has, in the number of scholars that are attending. And where we started is essentially we started this work pre-COVID. It really didn't pick up until after COVID, when we really saw the need. As we looked at the number of scholars and families that disengaged. We started this really looking at tier 3, but saw that that was soon unsustainable, and really started to think about like what systems could we put in place for tier 1, so that we could make this one, build that collective efficacy that Shelby talked about a little bit earlier, where everybody has a stake and has a part. We started building out our attendance team structure, specifically all of our schools. And when Diana and I speak, we're speaking from the systems level because we work at the central office, and this work has been really systems oriented of what can we do for the entire system, so that we can grow not just one of our schools, but all of the schools in our district. So really honing in on what does that tier 1 attendance team look like, who should be on it, how frequently should they meet, what should they be talking about, and building out those structures. And that work started early last year, but really a little later of the previous school year of 21-22, as we really saw that the need as a result of scholars coming back from the pandemic. Diana, feel free to chime in at any time. But we have really been jumping into improvement science and thinking about like, hey, yes, we're building out this tier 1 system, and what does that look like? So not just the meetings, but also we have a yearly attendance awareness campaign. So not just in September, but really all year long, and really having scholars and families to help drive that work. So we have a couple of scholar produced videos. We have some videos for families. We have workshops that we have been creating and having for our families, so that we can partner along with them. And that has been through the help of our ESB, as well as our community-based partners, because we know that schools can't do it alone. And really just thinking about all of our partners and how we can just include all of the stakeholders, because we all have the same mission. I'm going to let Diana just talk for a bit too, but it's just really honing in on that tier 1.
Thanks, Sine. Yeah, Diana Kasubi, coordinator in the Office of Equity, Federal Way Public Schools. I supervise our attendance and re-engagement work, where we were able to hire 2 re-engagement specialists at the district level through our grant. And they really were tackling the tier 3 work, getting out to do home visits, finding out where all of our scholars were after we lost them to COVID. It does feel really good, like Shelby was saying, to do those tier 3 interventions. You feel like you're helping, you're doing, working our tails off, getting food to families, getting them connected to services. We had over 3,000 students that we lost during COVID. And the problem with that is we didn't know if what we were doing was the right work, and we knew it was not sustainable. So we knew we had to start going to the families and the scholars and asking them what they needed from us, instead of assuming we knew what the solution should be. Luckily for us in Federal Way, before COVID, we already had a strategic plan, common goals and metrics, and a really strong data system in place. So we were able to center ourselves on that as we came back, and we had already started the MTSS work as well. I think the learning from the COVID time and the triage work we were doing was just the importance of getting to that tier 1 and making sure that those systems were in place across the district.
I think just to chime into that too, it's just really the honing in on, Shelby talked about it earlier, just the voice. So we did empathy interviews, but really just using our parent and scholar advisories. We meet with parents monthly at every school and at the district level, and scholars monthly at every school and at the district level, and just getting their feedback, because they're the ones that are living the experience, right? Like we can guess all day long or kind of make assumptions all day long, but if we're not really honing in on the folks that are being affected, we're not doing our job. So really leveraging the voice of our scholars and families and our staff to drive this work. So.
Well said. Thank you so much, Sine and Diana. Joel, I'll hand it back to you. Could you tell us a little more in detail about some of the successes that your team has found through your tier 1 work, and what are some tier 1 strategies that seem to be working for you? I see lots of questions in the chat about, okay, what's the menu of tier 1 strategies?
Yeah, well, and I was taking notes when people were putting down the things that they were doing at their schools. I was like, oh, I got to add that to the list. One of the big things for tier 1 is getting the ownership. We have our culture blueprint, and one of it is power of we. And so that's something we've been really working on, is power of we. We're all into this together as a staff. And so as an attendance team and as an engagement team, which is, kind of high school term for PBIS team, bringing those together is getting staff to talk about attendance. And so having our attendance person post the weekly attendance rates got staff talking about, this is coming up. I think we're going to have a high week, or we're going to have a low week. The really cool thing, and I'm a big proponent on relationships and the impact that relationships had. We just had Valentine's Day not too long ago. And what do you know? That was our highest attendance rate that we had after kind of, the holiday slump that kind of goes in there. And so just another way to see how, those relationships are key. And so what our team decided to do was we picked the day that Wednesdays was our, kind of our lowest attendance days. And so we decided to have awards for the teachers who took perfect attendance in a timely manner. And so we give awards for those staff and teachers. And then what kind of was really cool was one of our digital media teacher created a video for the staff meeting, a really funny video about, who is this reminder person that sends me emails of not getting my attendance in, and just really creating a talk around attendance. And that was kind of, it just organically awesome for staff to kind of join in that and have fun with that. And then he created the Almost Perfect Attendance Award, which he awarded to staff members. And it just, again, it's the power of we. How are we working together? And then through our work with our building leadership team, looking at the data, what was going to be our next tackle? We're a character strong school. And so again, with relationships, we decided to do 4 at the door, greeting students, hand, heart, head, other, building those connections. And so that's our next thing that we're working on. And we have a system called Minga. It's our, it's kind of the bathroom pass on steroids, but it also does praises and PBIS stuff. And in that, I was able to make it so teachers were recognizing other teachers for being at 4 at the door. So it's not me with my little checklist of like, oh, you're at 4 at the door. Again, organic, that they were picking something that they thought was going to work. And then them recognizing staff members. And then we do drawings for more awards for staff. And so just a couple cool things that we're doing where it is that really that power of we, that we're all into this together. Because we get as an administrator for a while we get those times where it's, well, this kid's not here, what's going on, and being like, here's our systems, here's your part of it, here's our part of it. So make sure you're doing your part of it, so that if it gets to here, we've already had that row of menu of options for these students, so we can get there. And so maybe we'll send out the funny video at some point, but it's pretty comical to see how teachers took that and rolled with it, and organically is the best way to go. So yeah.
Thanks, Joel. We will be sharing that video out to folks that have registered, as well as some of the details around the work that Sine and Diana have done in Federal Way. Well, Sine, Diana, to you, can you tell us about one success that your team has accomplished, and which tier 1 strategies seem to be working for you all?
I think the biggest success is really having all schools in our districts of 38 schools having clear, consistent tier 1 and tier 2 regular meetings. We went from maybe a year ago, honestly, to like maybe 2 or 3 schools having meetings regularly about attendance, to having all 38 with a structure, questions, protocols that they're using, the data that they're pulling, and really just the scaffolds around that, as well as the professional development that we've provided for all stakeholders, I think has been the clear success. So one of the things that we've done is, again, just because it's new work, it's not new. Attendance isn't new, but it might be a new structure for some folks, right? But ensuring that everybody understands what we mean. So having clear common definitions, a clear understanding of what that looks like and how attendance teams should function. And then like what the next step should be, right? So not just meeting, like meeting and following up, and then looking at the data and adjusting and making adjustments along the way, I think has probably been the biggest success for all of us here at the district. And while our tier one, our scholars attending 90% or more has not gone up the way we want it to, we have seen significant increases in the number of scholars that had tier three attendance that are now attending more regularly and have shifted to tier two and some even tier one. So really just honing in on that. And we know it's because of this, again, collective focus around clear common goals and clear common commitments for all of our school sites.
Yeah, and to speak a little bit more to that our professional development for all of our staff has been calibrated. So we take the same information and make sure that people are defining things in the same way. So not just saying, here's your menu of, I see people wanting like, tell me what a tier one intervention could be, because every school, every community might have other different successful tier one interventions that they're using. But what does tier one really mean, and making sure that everyone knows what it is that we're talking about. And when we say tier two, what do we mean? And so that has been very intentional work this year to focus on professional development for everyone who's part of those attendance teams, from the administrators to the office staff to any counselors or teachers that are involved on the team. So that has been a huge win. I think another thing that we just started doing that has been impactful is that each school attendance team has a space on a shared district-wide Microsoft Teams space where everyone can see everyone else's attendance team work. So there's transparency in that and mutual accountability in that, and sharing ideas with each other. So that has been a big win. I think it's helped push some people's practice this year.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to you, Joel, to talk about some of the challenges that you have experienced, you and your team. What is the most challenging part of building a tier one system around attendance?
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, we've all been through a lot, you know, with COVID and pandemic and that trust with families. And so not reverting back to not being curious, not reverting back to like, okay, let's just send them to court. We know that that's not the way that it works. It's just continuing to have that curiosity, continuing to not just say, hey, they need to be in the school, or they need to be, you know, go through the system. And we have to continue to ask that why, and have those people that are asking that why. And so that's probably being the champion. I think Shelby said, you know, like I don't think, you know, she said fairies or whatever, but we have to be that positive person to, and have that team that has that curiosity, that not looking at all the interventions that we can do to prevent to have to go through a different kind of system. And so I think that number one, that's where we have to start off with is just being that positive person. Funding part of it, that's another tricky part. And we've been very blessed to get the 9th grade success grant, and has really created some great work for us to really start that baseline for our students. To be successful all the way through. And obviously the work that we do with our 9th graders bleeds into all the work that we do with all of our students. We've used some of our poverty money around student safety to create a PBIS team, but we call it our engagement team. We hired 5 classified staff and 1 certificated. That really is our tier one boots on the ground, greeting kids at the doors, building those interventions, and it's, you know, it's amazing the work that these groups are doing, because they're building connections to where they need to go next, getting them to the counselors, getting them to our school social worker, getting them to those groups, because they're the consistents. They're there every single day. They're with those kids. And it was really great. My principal, again, putting in the funding to be able to fund that, because when those kids are getting those connections, getting those services, they are in the classrooms, that actually relieves me in my job so that I can be in the classrooms to create the opportunities to build those engaging lessons, to again, build that work. And so it's again, I would say the biggest challenge is keeping that positivity, but having that team, power of we, and keeping us accountable is what our mission is really been the best. And then working with the funding systems and being creative with those and tackling in a way that how are we connecting with our kids and our families so that we can to help these kids be here and find the resources that they need, because there's so much going on in these kids' lives. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Joel. Same question to you, Cindy and Diana. What are the challenges? And you know, can you speak a little bit about funding or?
For sure. So very similar to Joel. Challenges, I think for us, change is hard, right? So we went from not having clear systems and structures to having clear systems and structures and expectations, and doing it at a systems level. So that's a harder push for some folks because you're pushing their practice. But really funding, who owns attendance? That's the real question, right? Like, who owns it? Where does it live? Like, who's supposed to be doing the work? And then how do you really create systems to ensure that it's happening? So that was one of the big pieces. We received the grant, the ESSER grant. So we were able to hire 2 re-engagement specialists, but we knew that was a short-term thing, right? So really just thinking about like, hey, we have these folks here now. How can we build a system that allows this work to be sustainable once that grant ends? Because again, like if we're doing all this great work with these folks that we have here now, but the grant ends, like how do we continue to keep up that momentum along the way? So really just thinking about like, what can we do for all, and that's where that professional development comes in that Diana talked about, training all of the stakeholders at every level, from paraeducator all the way up to superintendent. Everyone has gone through additional training, given research, and just really building the capacity of all, going back to Joel's we culture, so that again, we know funding is an issue, but if we're building everybody's capacity, it makes it less of an issue because we all own the work. So.
Still my answer. I think where we're at moving forward is, as Shelby was saying, you need to have a data champion in each of your teams, and that's where we're still stuck in a few sites, a few individual schools, but building that data literacy capacity district wide for all of our staff is helping, because it might not necessarily be the attendance secretary who becomes the data champion, which seems to be the default setting for a lot of our schools. So making sure that everyone is getting that, and then finding out who are those people who data is their love language. They can't get enough of it, and they love talking about it, and they love sharing it, and they love finding new ways to visualize it for people. So we're still trying to find some people for some of our schools, but that's where we're at now.
Thank you so much. Last question to the whole panel, whoever wants to jump in first. What lessons have you learned, if you haven't already said them? And what advice would you have for folks just getting started on this work?
I'll go. So first off, start small. You got to do those building blocks to create that foundation, and then it continues to build, and you get wins, and celebrate those small wins. Don't set the goal at the end of the year, Sunday at the end of the week, in 2 weeks, and celebrate that, celebrate the staff, celebrate the people that are doing the work. Is really huge. Just like they mentioned, having that data person that is giving you that data every single week, so that the people, the counselors, the admin, the different teams can take that and do the work that they need to do to have that impact. And I keep saying it, have fun, stay curious. and just realize that this is, when I first looked at it, I was just like, okay, 300 truant students. We're at 60 some percent attendance. Like, that's the reality, and identify the reality. That's where you're at. And then how do you go from there? And be honest, open and honest and transparent about that. And then work with families, get people to get those conversations with the family and stakeholders so that we can keep trying to chip away. And it's hard. I am a pretty positive person, but it is the hard work, and it's really creating that team that helps supports you to get to the next step, and thinking outside the box. And one last thing for high schools, one thing we've really worked on is student-centered schedules. And so we individualize the work, the schedules, the classes they sign up for is the classes that we offer. And so that gives a motivation to the work that we're doing. But when we're having classes that kids want to be here, that creates opportunities for kids to be in class and not trying to do other things. So, yeah.
Lessons learned is listen, right? Sometimes we think we know some of the things, but listen and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to learn. Really tapping into our families and tapping into our scholars has been the biggest piece for us, because again, this is their lived experience. So really having those focus groups, having sessions where they're able to come give their voice, but not just the voice, because sometimes we ask people for things, but we don't really do anything with it. But really having clear feedback loops where we're getting the feedback, we're making adjustments, we're taking it back to them again, saying like, hey, we heard you say this. This is what we did. What do you think? What are the next steps? And really just being cognizant and following that improvement science of like, okay, we're trying it out. Did it work? Let's adjust, right? So really just, again, honing in on it, and just those clear, defined goals, right? Making sure that everything is clearly defined and we all understand the why, because if we don't have the same vision, if we're not on the same page, the work won't get done. So.
Yeah, I'd say the first place to start is making sure that you all have a clear vision, a common grounding in why you're doing this work, so that you can work together moving forward. If you have that already, then like Shelby was talking about, then the next step is, what data are you looking at, and why are you looking at that data, and what are you going to do with it? And the communication, two-way communication with the families and scholars is huge. Just talking at them or sending them things is not communication. So really taking in the information that they're sharing back with us. And sometimes it's hard to hear that, and it highlights some of our systems that are inequitable, and it's very uncomfortable, but we have to listen to that and we have to respond accordingly.
And celebrating, right? So right now we have an attendance cup that we have district-wide. So we're celebrating every week the school with the best attendance, but also the school that had the most improvement from last week. So just constantly celebrating, again, small wins equal big gains, right? So celebrating every day.
Wow. Thank you so much, Diana, Sine, Joel. Thank you for your leadership at a district level and in a high school. What you've shared today is really remarkable. I know I've learned a lot from you. I see lots of claps and hearts. And I think, Kathy, I want to just check in. Do we have time for one or two questions from the audience for the panel? I think we do, based on my understanding. And so if there's anything, any questions folks have for the panelists, would love to hear them now. You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A.
Chrissy, you're welcome to select some of the questions that are asked already in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'm looking through those. I think we did a pretty good job of answering most of those. What would you do different? What a great question from Elizabeth. if you had to do it over again, what would you do differently?
I think for us, our initial focus is we focus on tier 3 because again, those individual wins, it feels good. Like you're helping a scholar, you're helping a family. But when the problem is so large, like you really have to hone in on tier 1 from the get-go. So if we could do it differently, I would definitely like prioritize tier 1 from the start.
I would agree as well. Yeah. Tier, it's so easy to focus on tier 3. But there's the story about working upriver, things are coming downriver and you're like, what the heck's going on? And you just keep cleaning up your river, but you got to go upriver, which is that tier 1 to clean up the problem to then have that nice flow of success. So yep, I totally agree.
Joel, somebody wanted to know what 4 at the door was.
Yeah, so 4 at the door is it's character strong. And so basically it's like, you see those videos of like hand to hand, so high fives, fist pumps, elbows, some kind of heart to heart. So asking them about what's going on, or some kind of other, dance move or something like that. And then hand to hand, heart to heart, and head, hand and heart, and then other. So just another way to build a connection as that kid walks into the door. So our goal is to have teachers all at their doors greeting students. So doing that temperature check right when they come in so that they can best serve and build those connections.
I think with that, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to hand it over to Kathy. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will definitely follow up with folks. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kathy.
Yeah, and thank you, panel, for the time you've taken to do all that work and also to share it with us today. I know that we hope the conversation doesn't end here. We hope you bring this information back to your leadership team, that you share these ideas with your professional learning community, or even maybe reach out to some students and talk to them about why they are not coming to school sometimes. We do have a couple of resources to share. And Chrissy, did you want to talk about these specifically?
Yeah, I wanted to share several professional learning trainings that we have recorded and are available on our YouTube channel. We have a Truancy 101 webinar, withdrawing students guidance and webinar. And particularly relevant for today's conversation are boosting your teaming for better attendance and leveraging your data to implement effective tiered interventions. And we have a number of other videos available on the attendance YouTube playlist. And I wanted to share a couple more resources here. We've got some questions coming up about funding. The U.S. Department of Education has put out this resource, the very first link there, around federal funding options for sustaining efforts to address chronic absenteeism, even if there isn't a specific grant for attendance available. Please subscribe to the attendance newsletter if you have not already. We, I think, put out relevant resources, and certainly we look forward to sharing the resources from our panelists today in our next newsletter. If you have not checked out the OSPI attendance website or Attendance Works, lots of resources available there. And then any of your questions, please feel free to follow up with our attendance team at attendance@k12.wa.us. That's it.
Well, our last webinar of the school year is coming up next month. So we'll be talking about orientation practices to boost connections. We have Henderson Carlisle from the Center for High School Success with us to talk about his work on school orientations. And we're hoping that you can use it this summer to inspire you as you're kind of planning out what's happening for incoming students. And these links are going to be in the resource sheet. So if you want to check it out and share it with a friend who might be interested, it'll be there. It'll also be on our YouTube channel. We would love to get your thoughts about how today went. So we have a poll for you today that I'm going to launch. Yes. Oh, man. The polls have gotten really difficult on here. I'm going to launch this poll somehow. I don't know if I can though. Anyway, there will be a link if I can't figure it out in the next couple of minutes.
It launched.
It launched. Thank you, Chrissy. Oh my gosh. So yeah, tell us what you think about the webinar. And there's a longer form one that's going to launch after the Zoom closes, our feedback survey. So if you have people that you want to be on our webinar this next year, you want to make suggestions about changes we could make, we really want to hear from you. And it changes our practice. It's made our webinar a lot better over the years to hear your ideas. So thank you for contributing. We'd love to see you get clock hours for joining us. We offer equity clock hours. If you join live, you're already registered for the year through Zoom. You'll also need to register through PD Enroller every month. So PD Enroller is going to send you an evaluation in your email, and then we verify your attendance and we release the hours. If you are watching the video a little bit later, our process, it changes just a little bit. You do register each month for clock hours in PD Enroller and you complete the evaluation. And you'll also do our graduation equity feedback survey just to signal to us that you watched the video. And then we verify your attendance every couple of weeks that way. And if you have questions, our amazing admin assistant, Ronnie Larson, does our clock hours support, and you can contact her as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next month.